Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming for this talk. I know it's a Sunday and your time is precious, so the fact that you've invested it shows that you're interested in this topic, and I'll try to do my best to give you the information that you're looking for. Okay, so this talk is the Chettiars, the pioneer financiers of Singapore. Okay, so before the banks came, the Chettiars were here doing financing in the traditional way. Okay, I'll split this talk. There are 10 parts. Okay, the Chettiars are a phenomenon, regional phenomenon, not just Singapore. So to just look at them in Singapore is would not give a clear picture. So I'll try to cover Southeast Asia and India, but due to the shortage of time, I might not be able to do that. But I will definitely do the first 7 parts, and that's the structure. Okay. Now the origins. Who are they? Okay, they are basically just Indians, Tamils. Okay, they are the Indians have caste names. So the Chettiar is actually a caste name which refers to traditional traders or businessmen. Okay, so they are Tamil speaking. So they are no different from any of the other Tamil people you see in Singapore. Okay, they are we have many gods in Hinduism, and of course everyone prays to every god, but the main one the Chettiars follow is Shiva. Okay, so they put the white ashes on the forehead. Their oral history goes back to 2000 BC. Okay, so they have a very long history. Now, this is a typical Chettiar, not today, but before the war, this is how Chettiars would dress. Okay, this photo was taken at a studio, probably a few studios, probably Raffles Studio at Raffles Hotel. So, and this happens to be my grandfather. So he proudly goes there without shoes, without shirt, because this is how they actually dress for the climate. And they used to shave the hair because it was a hot climate. Okay, and the white ashes are a religious mark. And you can then the dressing changed after World War from the 1930s slowly. This is the Chettiar woman. Before the war, Chettiar women never came to Singapore, so you would not have seen them. They were all in India because Indians, Singapore was a part of India when it started. So the Indian mentality was that when they came to Singapore, that they were not leaving home. They were just moving like from Malacca to Penang or to Singapore. So they left their families there. And they just came here and then went back after 1 or 2 years. Okay. So where are they from? They are from Chettinadu and Tamil Nadu. It's a part of Tamil Nadu. And the central city there is Karaikudi. It's and around this city is about 80 kilometers from Madurai. And it's a very, very dry area, not good for farming. Around this area, they've got 75 villages from which they come from. Okay, and they divide themselves into 9 clans. Okay, so and each clan has a temple. Okay, now this is a map of okay, this is India. So Singapore is on this side here. So when you sail from Tamil Nadu, you reach Malaysia. And in Tamil Nadu, the southern part, quite close to Sri Lanka, is where the Chettiars come from. And these are the 75 villages. Okay. And this is how the terrain looks like. Very dry. There's no, there's not many rivers. So you can only farm when there is monsoon rain. Okay. So people from this area, many of them came to Singapore because it's not good farmland. Okay. So the Chettiars today they number about 120,000 people globally. So they're actually very small community. Okay, in those days when they were playing a key role in Singapore, maybe only 30,000 people globally. So today, 20% live outside India. So Malaysia and Singapore were the traditional places, but now in the last 30 years, with the IT boom and all that, USA, Canada, Dubai, Australia, and UK. So, but they live in about 80 countries, but not many in most of the other countries. In Singapore, there are about 1,000 families. So that should be around 3,000 to 4,000 people. Okay, so that's where they are spread. Okay, so now let's look at their role in Southeast Asia, because when they came to Singapore, it was not just Singapore. Singapore was a part of Malaya, and the British were colonizing Burma, and the Dutch were in Indonesia. So it was part of a colonial phenomenon. So just let me look at overview of Southeast Asia economically. Then you can see why they came here and why they did what they did. Now, the Chettiars have actually been trading with Southeast Asia for a long time. There was this big empire called the Chola Empire, which is around 1000 AD. In fact, recently they said that the Singapore stone could possibly have been a edict written by a Chola king when he conquered this part of the world. So under them, they had the royal right to trade overseas. So they were exporters of cotton, which was the main product exported from India in those days, and gems, diamonds, pearls, and rice. Okay, and from Malacca, the main thing they will bring back is spices and also gold. Malaya was known as Swarna Bhumi, or the land of gold. I think in Kelantan there used to be gold, and they had rattan and aromatic goods. So this is the trading map. So this is so in those days they used to live on the coast. Okay, they were not living where they are living today. So this is Malaya, and all these purple areas were ruled by the Chola Empire, rule or under their suzerainty. Okay. So then in the colonial area, okay, after the Chola Empire and the Sultanate of Malacca finished, then there was not much happening in the Malaya. So for 200 to 300 years, maybe nothing much was going on. They were still trading, but on a small scale. And then the new chapter comes in with the coming of the British. Okay, so the British conquered all these colonies, and all these colonies were then integrated into the global economic system by making each country a producer of a certain commodity. Okay, so Europe was industrializing, it needed a lot of commodities. So they saw the climate. Oh, Malaysia is very good for rubber. Okay, let's grow rubber. Burma is very good for rice. Okay, and so on. So each one of them from scratch, they had to build their economies not around their traditional productions, but around what the British policy was. Okay, and that required a lot of money, a lot of investment to clear the forest, to clear the swamps, and to build the plantations and the mines. Okay. So these are the, I won't go into detail, but Malaya, the main one was tin and rice. Opium was not produced there. It was just traded through. Tin and rubber, actually, tin, rubber, and oil palm. Sri Lanka was tea, coffee, and coconut. Myanmar was rice. And Indonesia was rubber and oil palm. Vietnam, Cambodia was rice. And the Chettiars did a little bit, not much, but in Mauritius and South Africa, and that was sugar. Okay, now in Singapore and the founding of Singapore 1819, the reason for the founding of Singapore, it may not be well advertised, is to protect the opium trade with China. Okay, Hong Kong, they are very open about their history. They say opium. But Singapore, we are very, we don't emphasize this point too much. Basically, the opium from India was going to China, and the Dutch were in Indonesia, so the British and the pirates were there in Malacca. So it was very a dangerous trading route. So they founded Penang and Singapore to give a protection. Okay, so in all the documents, usually you'll call this protect the China trade. But what's the China trade? Is the opium trade. Okay, and 1819 Singapore was founded, and what happens? 50, 60 years, opium has been going to China. 20 years later, we are so successful in protecting the trade. China declares opium war because too much opium is going there. Okay, so this is the foundation of Singapore's wealth in the first 50 years. And opium was the main source of British taxes. We were a tax-free colony, so a few things only were taxed. Opium was one of them until World War I. Okay, so everyone who was wealthy, or I shouldn't say everyone, most of the people who were wealthy in Singapore by the first 50 years, okay, directly or indirectly made money from opium. Okay, the British brought the opium from India to Singapore. The Chinese took it to China. The Chettiars did the trade financing. Okay, and other people would be ship handling, supplying the ships. Everyone, whether Indian or Chinese, anyone who is rich couldn't have made money without doing something, supplying to the ships or looking at lodging or something related to the opium industry. Okay. Uh, so the Chettiars were the main financiers of that, and I'll give some examples later. Okay, now in terms of local production, the first one was tin. Okay, tin was already being under production from 1820s, but there was a major discovery in Perak called Larut 1848. That made Malaysia a major exporter of tin. And that's the first major export from Malaysia. Until then, the British didn't go and take over Malaysia, just Penang and Malacca and Singapore, because they just want to protect the trade route. They're not interested in Malaya. But once tin was discovered, it became valuable. So they needed to protect it. And this is what brought the big Chinese immigration, because the Cantonese were actually tin miners, experienced tin miners. And though the tin was mined in up in Malaya, the Singapore was the port of export. So it will come all the way to Singapore. So and there was a tin smelting plant later on in Singapore. So a lot of the wealth in Singapore was coming from the tin, especially after 1850s and the Suez Canal. Okay, but the tin was very, what do you call it? It's not a good form of wealth because it's very concentrated. You have one rich man who owns the thing, and then you've got all these coolies, and then you supply them opium. So it was kind of a very unequal society, and then brothels, and it was just not good socially, not widespread wealth. Rubber was different because anybody could plant rubber, 1 hectare, 2 hectare. So rubber became important because the Benz car was discovered in 1886. So they did vulcanizing process, and rubber was used for tires. Okay, so Brazil first had rubber, then it came to Malaysia, and it was the largest exporter of rubber, and this was the basis of wealth in Malaysia. Okay, tin mines were just a few here and there, wherever there was a tin ore, but rubber could be planted anywhere. This is why they built roads, railroads. All the small towns were opened up because of rubber. And it was not just the big tauke who could have rubber. Anyone, even they got empty land, just 1 hectare they can make. So this was a very good form of wealth that made Malaysia wealthy. Okay, and it was one of the most valuable colonies of the British. Again, Singapore was the export port. Okay, the pioneer planter was Tan Che Yen. Okay, he was a grandson of Tan Tock Seng. He planted the first plantation in Malacca. Okay, in 1895. He went to all the British banks. No one would lend them money because the British banks are not into what you call venture capital. This is an unknown crop, never planted before. No one knows it's successful or not. So the Chettiars loaned him the money. Okay. And a lot of the other rubber tycoons, Tan Kaki and so on, I'll come to it later, got their seed funding from the Chettiars. And the tin mining, Yap Alloy also was a major client of the Chettiars. Okay. So now they operated under many flags. Okay, I told you throughout the region. So Myanmar and Malaya were British. Indonesia was Dutch. Vietnam and Cambodia was French. They were a little bit in Thailand too, but Thailand, they couldn't operate much because the king, firstly, did not encourage this. And again, there was no crop that was going to be integrated into the colonial system. So there was no major demand. It was the British forcing, like people to go into rice, go into all these crash crops. So that didn't happen in Thailand because it was still a kingdom. Okay. So they could operate in any country because they were operating using Tamil as their major, as their base. Okay, so that's and then a little bit in South Africa. So they had about 400 towns and villages in all these territories. So there were about 3,000 firms. Okay, this is in the 1930s. So all the firms were very well networked, even though they were small firms. Some had 4 or 5 branches, the bigger ones, but they were all related. All community of 120,000, so everyone knows everyone. Okay, so because of this, they were able to provide a very rare service then, which is international money transfer. So if you want to send money from Singapore to Rangoon, those days shipping, you send the money, gets lost in the ship capsize, all these things. So you just go to a money lender in Singapore and he'll say, okay, you give him $1,000, then he'll write you a chip saying, go to this company in Rangoon, give it to him, he'll give you the $1,000. So you just need to take this paper with you. You go there and in Rangoon, you get the money. Okay. Even the British banks could not do that to the same extent because they only had a few branches. Chettiars had 400. Okay. There's an anecdote that in those days, because it was so shipping, especially before steamship, was so risky that people won't send cash with a full note, because if the ship capsizes, you lose everything. So my grandfather and all that, what they say is that before them, they used to cut the notes in half. So one half you send in one person in one ship and another half in another ship. So it arrive in India, you paste the notes, then you go to the bank and you cash the money. But those days, currency notes were very few who had currency notes. So the, customized service lah. So I think the bank doesn't care. It's cut lah. Okay. Today, I don't think MAS, you have much of a chance. Okay. Now, why were they able to do all of this? Their business. Okay, one was they had a historic relations way before the British, so they were very useful to the British. When the British opened up the opportunity, they were number one to seize it because the British came from England. They didn't come from other places, so they already have the trust and relationship with the British. They also have the relationship with Southeast Asia. Then it was the time of the Industrial Revolution, which needed all these commodities in Europe. So there was a huge demand, sudden spike in demand for commodities. And the British were intent on making all of them colonial plantation economies, not to produce food, but to produce cash crop. So Swiss, and that means everything is from scratch. There was no rubber plantation. You convert all of Malaya. How much money, to cut the plantation, to grow the trees, okay? And then the Suez Canal was built in 1869. This made the cost of shipping even cheaper. So things like rice and a lot of low-value goods became high demand in Europe as well. So another spike in demand. And there were very few European banks. And more importantly, the banks really didn't lend money to the locals. I'll come to that later. Okay. So now this is a map of the world. See, England is here. Singapore is here. Okay. So before 1869, Suez Canal, it took them 6 months to go around like this. And this place here was called the Cape of Good Hope, because good luck to you, you cross over without having a ship capsize. Okay, then you sail through open sea. After Suez Canal, it came this way, very close to the shore, very safe, and it took 2 to 3 months. Okay, that's the map. So 6 months route cut to 2 to 3 months. So this is actually when Singapore really develops after 1869. Before that, only opium. Nothing else could be exported to England very economically. Too costly, too much insurance. Okay, and then steamships came. Okay, now their business I'll go through later. I just want to summarize their story here. Is that 1929, the Great Depression took place. Until then was boom years for the Chettiar, from 69 to 29, 50 years. And after the Great Depression, all the rubber, rice, everything, no demand in Europe. So all the colonies go into recession. And already there was anti-colonial, slowly movements were starting. So together with the decline in economy, the Chettiars, because they couldn't get the loans back from the people, they started taking over all their land. Like in Burma, they started owning 2/3 of all the rice fields. So a country which is peasant depending on rice, you take over all their land. So they became very unpopular. And they were seen as being the financial arm of the colonialists. So in every colony, they were very easy target, and they were very small population, just a few thousand in each country. Okay. So, and then back came World War II. So under the Japanese, they had heavy property losses. People who owe them money died. Then the people pay back the loan in Japanese currency, which became valueless after the war. So their asset value just shrunk. Okay. And then after the war, every country became independent. And many of them, just like they kicked the British out, they say we want to kick all these people who are sucking the blood from our economy together with the British. So in Burma, 62, Ceylon, 63, Vietnam, 73, all were kicked out, everything nationalized. And Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia were the only ones where it's not nationalized. But even Malaysia and Indonesia, there were a lot of restrictions. They can't sell the land and take the money back to India, things like that. Only Singapore, free trade, left it untouched. Okay. So after that, they went back to India with no money, nothing. Okay. Therefore, they went into education because they thought, and they lost their guts. Business is so risky. They saw the educated people getting good jobs. Okay, so they went into, and a number of Chettiars founded universities in India. So they went into universities, and many of them are now professionals, IT professional, engineers, doctors. In fact, the majority. Okay. But now the India also had a socialist economy, very anti-business. But the last 20 years that has changed, and it's notable that the younger people now, many of them are doing work for a while, IT professional, then they start their own company. So it seems like the entrepreneurial spirit is reviving a little bit. Okay. Now, what are their contributions? Okay, in Myanmar, this is a quote from the governor. You represent a very important factor indeed in the life of this province. Without the assistance of the Chettiar banking system, Burma would never have achieved the wonderful advance of the last 25 to 30 years. The Burman today is a much wealthier man than he was 25 years ago. And for this state of affairs, the Chettiar deserves his thanks. Okay. Then in Ceylon, this is a quote from a British planter. Hamlets became villages, villages became towns, towns became cities thanks to the Chettiars. You'll find in Malaysia the same thing. If you say Gemas, Kluang, all these places, they were started as rubber plantation town. The first person there would be a Chettiar banker and a Chinese provision shop. This is the main street. Okay, so then all of them became towns. So you'll find the Chettiar Kitangis are always the main street, even in Singapore, Raffles Place. Okay, but some, of course, there were people who didn't like them, the anti-colonialists. Okay, this is from someone someone who author. Natukoti Chettiar was often accused of impoverishing poor farmers, even though evidence shows that it was larger landowners in the Mekong Delta who often lent money to tenant farmers, who were the Chettiar's biggest clients. Okay. Then another author, Virginia Thompson, says the Chettiars are the worst of a bad profession. Okay. Their holdings in Cochin, China, about a fourth. That means in Vietnam, South Vietnam, they own 1/4 of the rice fields. Okay. Now, what is their global value? Because of all these things, there will be a very good documentation of their wealth, because the British were forced to conduct banking inquiries to find out if they actually, what were their practices? Were they, is it true what they were accused of? So in Burma in 1930, in Madras in 1930, Vietnam in 1937, there were comprehensive colonial inquiries, okay? And because of that, we know what is their asset value. So they had about 1.25 billion rupees in 1930. Okay, now I convert it based on the gold value to today's currency. It's about 39 billion, 40 billion in today's money for a community of 30,000 people. Okay, and they all used to live in joint families. That means brothers live together. So we are talking about 5,000 to 6,000 families. Sorry, there are 5,000 nuclear families. If we take the joint families, it's even less. So it's actually net worth of 8,000 per family. 8 million per family. And if you put joint family, 20, 30 million per joint family, okay? And the bulk of their wealth was in Burma, okay? In those days, Burma was considered the most wealthy place, okay? Singapore was considered the poorest, okay? Because we had no commodities, okay? So 64% was in Burma, 20% in Malaya, Ceylon was 13% in Vietnam, okay? Now I'll show you a little video. It's about a 5-minute video. This was commissioned by the Chettiar's Temple for the Singapore bicentennial celebrations. There were 3. I'll show them 3, one by for each segment. This one is talks about the it's 5 minutes. Is about the journey from India to Singapore. Okay.
The Chettiars, a community of traders who originated from Kaveripumpattinam of the Chola Kingdom and later settled across 96 villages in Chettinad, the present Sivagangai and Pudukkottai districts of Tamil Nadu, South India. They were well known for their simple lifestyle, rich cultural heritage, and philanthropy. During the colonial periods, the newly established colonies needed financiers to fund the businesses. Seizing the opportunity, Chettiars set out across Asia, serving as merchant bankers and moneylenders. They migrated to places such as Burma, Saigon, Ceylon, Medan, Malaya, and Singapore.
As a fourth-generation Singaporean, I return home with ease and comfort. Today, my brothers and I are able to enjoy this luxury because of our forefathers who stepped ashore with great hope but little assurance. My great-grandfather, Chokkalingam Chettiar, came to Singapore in the early 1900s, all the way from Chettinad.
சிங்கப்பூருக்கு புறப்படுறேன் போயிட்டு வரேன்
நல்லபடியா போயிட்டு வா அப்பச்சி
அப்பச்சி சிங்கப்பூருக்கு புறப்படுறேன் போயிட்டு வரேன்
Traveling overseas was not an easy feat those days. Hence the Chettiars had a traditional farewell when departing for distant voyages. Similarly, my great-grandfather bid farewell to his loved ones before setting forth.
அப்பதான் ஐயா சிங்கப்பூருக்கு போயிட்டு வரோம்
நல்லபடியா போயிட்டு வா அப்பச்சி
This customary tradition known as Sulikkirathu is still very much in practice today among the Chettiars.
மெய்யப்பா உனக்கும் அப்பச்சிக்கும் தேவையான பலகாரம் தேங்குள் எல்லாம் பொட்டியில வச்சிருக்கேன் எடுத்துக்கங்க
சரி அப்பதா அத்தா போயிட்டு வரோம் அத்தா
அப்பச்சி சொல்ற மாதிரி கேட்டுக்கோ
சரி அத்தா ஐயா போயிட்டு வரேன்
It is customary for one of the sons to accompany his father in such journeys. Similarly, my paternal grandfather, Meyyappa Chettiar, also departed for Singapore together with my great-grandfather. The Chettiar community adopted an apprenticeship approach for males as early as 11 years old, spanning across 4 key stages for about 16 years. Young boys will start off as a Pittiyadi Payyan, advancing to being an Aduttal, thereafter becoming a Melal and Kootali in the 3rd and 4th stages. They will eventually become Mudalali, the owner of the business. A journey that spelled new beginnings for generations to come. My great-grandfather and grandfather set forth towards the port of Nagapattinam on a bullock cart. It was a tiresome journey that lasted 3 to 5 days. Then began a long voyage embedded with risk and uncertainty across the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. Long-distance voyages posed numerous threats. The possibility of sinking and threats of piracy. From Nagapattinam, the ships sailed southwards to Singapore via Penang for over a week. As the voyage ended at the Johnston's Pier, my great-grandfather and grandfather stepped ashore to be greeted by their kins, Sathappa Chettiar and Azhagappa Chettiar, who were already well established in Singapore.
வாங்க சோனா வா மெய்யப்பா எல்லாரும் நல்லா இருக்கீங்கல்ல ஊர்ல ஆத்தா அப்பச்சி ஆச்சி எல்லாம் நல்லா இருக்காங்களா
எல்லாரும் நல்லா இருக்காங்க நீங்க எல்லாம் எப்படி இருக்கீங்க ஊர் பேர் தெரியாத இடத்துல நம்ம 4 பேரை பாக்குறதுக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமா இருக்கு
இல்ல நம்ம சிங்கப்பூர் திண்டாயுதபணி அருளால எல்லாம் நல்லபடியா நடக்கும் வாங்க கிட்டங்கி போயே பேசலாம்
As Chettiars travelled abroad without their families, they created a strong societal support among their peers wherever they went. Singapore was of no exception. Kitangis were home to such camaraderie whereby Chettiars lived and worked harmoniously. As the doors of the Kitangi at Market Street opened, my great-grandfather settled down to inscribe a new chapter in the history of our family lineage. His journey towards prosperity began here.
Okay, you can stop here.
Fine.
Okay, so now we'll start with the financial services, right? So far, I just did a snapshot of the community. So now it's actually what did they do and why were they successful in what they did, okay? Now, although today we call them money lenders, okay, originally the British in the early documents and court cases, they call them private financiers. Okay, the word money lender came in only in the 1930s because there was something called a Money Lending Act to cover everybody, pawn shops and all kinds of other things. So, okay, now, so actually what they did in the early days was more similar to banking, but however, they are not a bank because bank is a corporation with shareholder, everything. These are all individual operator. So they did investment capital for new businesses. So it's like a VC. And sometimes they'll take a share in a rubber plantation, whatever, they also take a stake. They give working capital for existing business. And for very large, like tin mines and all that, they do syndicate loan, kongsi. Three of them take the risk. They also took deposits. Those days, you want to deposit money, especially businessmen, other businessmen, Indian or Chinese, they got extra cash. They can deposit with them and get interest. They got account book. And because of that, they all have metal safes. Then they also did the international fund transfer, which I told you. And they issued a discount demand draft. This is for the trading, when a trader gets the imports and exports, before they can pay, they'll give you an IOU, something like that. That's a demand draft. And they even did insurance for shipping. It was called the Chetty bond insurance. Okay, their clientele was across the board. The big ones are plantations and tin mines. And these two are no joke because the time frame is very long. I mean, a plantation where Malaya didn't even have roads. So you might have to lay the road to the plantation. You have to cut the forest, burn it, let it settle for 2 to 3 years, then take out all the tree stumps. Then you plant the rubber tree. It takes 5 years for the rubber to come out with the first crop. All this while, you need the workers, you need the capital, you don't get any return. So you really need long-term financiers. Tin mines, maybe take shorter, maybe 2 to 3 years, they can start a tin mine, but the investment is huge. Okay, so, then they did a lot of the shop house developments. In fact, sometimes my talks, I find people, come here, especially as one day, a couple of Europeans came and I said, why are you interested in this? And then they said, oh, we own a few of these, we own a family office, we own a few of these shop houses, and all the document got a chopped Chettiar. Okay, so because the Chettiars were often the ones who either funded the development or later on they mortgage it. So you find in shop houses, a lot of them. Farmers, not in Singapore, they gave seasonal loan just for the season. And even fishermen, daily loan, these are the small scale companies. They go to the seaside, give them the money to buy the fish, worm, everything, go fish, come back to the market, they collect the money. And in Singapore, hawkers, they'll lend them $2-3 just to buy the ingredients, noodle and all that, those roadside hawkers, give them the money in the morning, night they come back, charge interest. Though the amounts are small, this kind of loan, your interest can be high because it's one day. Okay, traders, export and import, then tongkang owners, then distributors, retailers, restaurants, basically across the economy because there was no one else. Okay, now who are their clientele? Okay, royalty, Malaysia in particular, and even Singapore, the Sultan, second Sultan Ali, he has borrowed, I'll come to that later. Eurasian civil servants, colonial officials, largest clientele were the Chinese entrepreneurs, okay, and the Eurasian civil servants. and they were business partner. So they would also take equity in the client's business. So actually what they were in is what today you'll normally call small and medium enterprises banking. So startup capital, expansion, and working capital. They almost never lend consumption loan. Okay. It's only for established clients like the civil servants, the British civil servants, Eurasian, they were considered safe, you know. They were established, they had an office, so it's safe, they have a regular paycheck and the royalty. If not, they never lend for consumption. And they never lend to poor or desperate people. They were for business people. They had an office right on Raffles Place. Okay, everything is above the law. You know, they have all documents. They use lawyers and so on. So it was never for poor people. That was more for the pawn shops and later the Sikh and Chinese money lenders who came in. Okay. In Singapore, you know, after the PAP government came in 1959, they were socialist government in the beginning, right? So one of the things was they wanted to clamp down on the money lending business and pawn shops as well. So Chettiars were accused of being Shylocks of Singapore. Okay, so this is in 1975, New Nation. But actually, the next day, the paper issued an apology. Okay, not because what they wrote was defamation. Apparently, there's no law to protect that. It's because this man here, you can see his face is clearly visible. So he sued them for defamation. They call me a Shylock, not the community, me a Shylock. So you are defaming me and the community. So the Straits Times, they apologize. Okay. Okay, who are the famous clients? Okay, Yap Oloy, who is the founder of KL, or maybe not the founder, the builder of KL, and a big tin mining magnate. Okay, he's as big as Tan Kaki in Malaysia, a cornerstone of the growth of the Chinese community there. And in fact, at one stage, he because I think tin mining tin prices collapsed, he couldn't pay his debts. So he had to look for more collateral. And you know, in a tin mining town, it's a Wild West town. They have not much there, right? KL is nothing, a tin mine with the coolies. They got the opium. And the tin already is given as collateral to the Chettiars. You know, there's a court case on this, so we know the details. So they need more collateral. So the Chettiars are very flexible and entrepreneurial. So they said, Oloy, what capital, what more collateral can you give us? So he said, you know, here I got nothing, you know. Okay, the only thing of value generating revenue other than my tin mine is the brothels. Here, take my 3 brothels. So the Chettiars actually took the 3 brothels as collateral. Okay, can a bank compete with them? That's how they were flexible. They were. Okay. Then there's a Lok Yu, who's another major tin mining magnate. He's a founder of Cathay organization. Tan Che Yan, which I said earlier, is the first rubber planter, and he was a grandson of Tan Tok Seng. Tan Kaki, his father was a rice trader, and his father went bankrupt when the rice prices dropped. So he became very ill. So on his deathbed, so he called Tan Kaki to come to Singapore. Again, all this I know from the Tan Kaki's own biography. Okay, it's written there. So he came as a 14-year-old boy. And then he worked hard, revived the business, and he paid off all the Chettiars. Took him 10 years. So the Chettiars said, wow, this is a very, very trustworthy and capable gentleman. So they backed him in all his future. They gave him the money to start his first pineapple plantation and backed him in all the other things until, you know, he became the richest man in Southeast Asia, called the Henry Ford. There's a little video about that. Okay, then the Sultan Ali of Johor, I'll come to that later. Thomas Church, and a number of Indians. I mean, there were not many Indians in Singapore, and most of them were not in business. So, but those Indians that were in business, you know, borrowed from them. When I was young, I even remember there were Jewish clients. I didn't know what a Jew was. My father would say, you know, he's a Jewish. Okay. Now, this is the Sultan Ali of Singapore. This is from the Wikipedia, okay? He is the son of Sultan Hussein, was the one who signed Singapore Treaty. So in 1860, Sultan Ali reportedly borrowed 53,600 from a Chettiar money lender, Kavanachana Shelapa. Okay, Then Sultan signed an agreement with Shelapa to contribute a portion of his monthly allowance to repay his debt. Okay, so he couldn't repay, and we just jump to the next yellow one. So Sultan Ali granted Shelapa the right to trade off Muar to the Temenggung of Johor as mortgage if he's unable to pay off his debts in time. And this is true for Kedah, many of the sultans, and they thought they were good people to lend to because they had property and they had British were giving a monthly allowance, so these two were their collateral. Okay, the next one is a short video of 5 minutes. This was actually done during 2021 for the Smithsonian program channel from the US. It was never broadcast in Singapore. They did a 45 minutes one on Singapore and 5 minutes is on the Chettiars. So you can watch this.
East of the Singapore River was originally home to rich Europeans. It's now become the traditional home of Singapore's Indian community, the third largest ethnic group on the island. As well as the Hindu temples, there's one building with a secret you can bank on. It's easy to miss. After all, nothing about number 1 Tank Street seems remarkable until you discover the secret hiding within it. This is Singapore's last Ketangi, a unique kind of bank. If you think it looks small scale, think again. Because it was once part of a banking network worth $40 billion.
Basically, this is where they do the business. Everything is seated on the floor. This space is considered one business. In fact, it's called a box space. And a business is actually called a box because based on this. When you say, how's your business, how's your box?
These boxes belong to the Chettiars, a devout caste of Hindu moneylenders from southern India. And for many would-be entrepreneurs in Singapore, what was inside the Chettiars box represented their best hope of securing credit.
If you wanted to borrow money from a British bank, okay, you would have to be someone of some status. You would have to know how to speak English. You must know how to sign or write something. You must wear a coat and tie, the attire. The whole process was very intimidating.
During the colonial period, no British-owned bank is about to give a loan to a young Chinese immigrant with no collateral, no matter how big his dreams might be.
In the case of a Chettiar, all he had to do is walk in and just sit down on the floor. And usually the Chettiars didn't wear shirts. Whereas the borrower would probably be wearing a shirt. So it might look to him that he's wealthier than the Chettiar.
Living and working in the same humble surroundings, the Chettiars provided a different kind of banking experience to the Europeans.
And the process is very simple. You can speak in broken Malay. You can say what you need. And the Chettiar will go take the trouble to visit your business, your family, understand your circumstances. And then he can tailor the loan exactly to your needs.
In 1904, one particular Chinese immigrant plucks up the courage and enters the world of the Chettiars. When he first came to Singapore, he started as an apprentice in his family's rice distribution business. But now, he wants to strike out on his own. To realize his ambitions, he needs a startup loan from Singapore's equivalent of an angel investor. With an initial $7,000 advance, he's able to buy his own pineapple processing plant. It's his first step towards a multi-million-dollar fortune and a business empire that stretches across 5 continents. His name is Tan Kah Kee, and he'll come to be called the Henry Ford of Asia. Subbiah's father ran the family business started by his grandfather, and it was by investing in people like Tan Kah Kee that the Chettiars powered Singapore's economy throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. But by the 1970s, modern banking methods replaced the Chettiar way of business. And now all that remains is this one empty Ketangi. But without the Chettiars, Singapore wouldn't have become the financial capital it is today.
The Chettiars, religion and business were very much intertwined. It was like the Protestant work ethic. You work hard, you live a very simple life, and the more prosperous your business is, God is blessing you more. So wherever they went, one of the first things they did was build a temple.
Okay, so now, as you saw, the lending process is very simple. You just need to have a reference, somebody who already knows the Chettiar. So for your first loan, and he will have to be the guarantor. Okay, then the Chettiar will go and visit your business, your home, talk to your wife, talk to your neighbors, or at least not necessarily talk, but look around the neighborhood. So he really understands your circumstance. Okay, and based on that, he knows what kind of risk he wants to take with you. And you just sign a simple IOU or promissory note. Cash is issued immediately. It can be day or night. If you really need it urgently, he'll just give you the cash. Okay, weekday, weekend, it doesn't matter. And the interest rate, was 2 to 3% per month. Okay, depending on the size of the loan and the risk and so on. Okay, which is equivalent to your credit cards now. No collateral in general. So therefore, there was high risk. There's no collateral in Singapore, no collateral, unless it's a very big loan. Okay. In Malaya, because it was all rubber loans, there was collateral on the land. Okay. So this is a typical the promissory note from 1926. It says 24%. This is what is called a VOU. Okay. Which is a sign, IOU is for 1%, V is for 1%. Okay, and that's a kind of the record card. Every single person when they start, it's a foldable. You can see here, you can fold it into a small little envelope. You paste it, it will look like a small little envelope. So here you put the date 1985, who came, why he wanted to borrow, blah 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 blah, how much money, and then you split it out into 6. This guy took a 6-month loan, so you put down the date 19 June 85. You come and give me $27. Okay, so each date, the date is put there. So you give the client the repayment schedule. You have his phone number, everything. So you just, so you can see, right? This, if you paste this thing, if you fold it into 3 and you paste it on one side, the other side is like an envelope. So what they will do is they will take this VOU or any other document like this, fold it and keep it inside this client record. So if there's a visiting card, there's a phone number, anything they need, they just put inside. And this is a complete record. So what you call a file, customer file, is so small that it can go in your wallet. Okay, this is the real size. I scanned this is the real size. It's not a miniaturized size. Okay, so because they're operating out of such a small thing, so 100 clients will not be even the size of an A4 textbook. Okay, so defaults. Because they did not take collateral, defaults were there. My father says about 10% was default, and it's usually due to bankruptcy. The business goes bad, bankruptcy, or the person dies. Okay, so usually they say because of business failure, if they believe in the guy, they normally will just give another loan and let him start back up again. Death, then it becomes more problematic. How much compassion they want to show the family. In the rare case that people run away, the most they run away is to Malaya. People are based in this area. So because the Chettiar has already seen who is relative, this and that, they can track them down with their Chettiar network. in Malaya, they say, who is his cousin? Usually they'll be able to track him down. Okay, but the first fallback is the guarantor. Okay, if all else fails, then they took court judgments. So this is an example of a court judgment. This is that from my grandfather, great-grandfather, the old man that you see the photo. So this is 1915. Okay, for $198. And he took it against, what's his name? Oh, the name is T-Bird. He's either a Eurasian or a European. Okay. So where did they get their capital from? From the colonial inquiries, we know that 70% was their own capital and 20% was from British banks and 10% from non-Chettiar deposits. I told you other traders, other businessmen deposit their money. So the British banks, initially there were no British banks, but when the banks came in, they saw how lucrative the Chettiar lending business was. But they were not able to lend to the locals because they don't speak the language, they don't understand the circumstance. You say you have a restaurant somewhere in Pasir Ris, who's going to go and see it? What is this? They don't understand, dialect and all these things. And the European manager, wear coat and tie, he needs all this, high maintenance. So they said, safer we lend it to the Chettiar and they go and lend it to the locals. So they made an extra margin on that. They might borrow from the British bank for 1% and then now at 2%, something like that. Okay, then all the firms, their names were based on the initials of their 5 generation. So like my father's firm was RMVLNS. So Ramasamy, Velayapan, Lakshmanan, Nachiappan, Subbiah. So the 5 generation. Okay, so another example of this. This was the official company registration. And sometimes this was very confusing because sometimes they use 3, sometimes they use 5, sometimes. So I show you some examples. Like this is a court case. You can see 1861, Straits Times. This is against Felix Henry Gottlieb, either again a Eurasian or a European, by the brothers Kuna Pana Lana. Okay, look at the spelling. And the other guy is Kuna Pana Lana. This has a H, this doesn't have a H. So there were always these spelling differences and all that, which made it very difficult when it came to legal cases. Okay, so there's an example of a statutory declaration of one Chettiar, Ramaya Chettiar, who made to the court, these 5 different names are actually me. Okay, NPLSTMV is the initial. This one is Nana Pana Lana Sina Tana. That's the full version. This is a full name version. It's just so confusing. Okay, so just to give you an example, so that legally everything is transacted under him. Okay, now there's one more video. This one is from the museum, from the Chettiar Temple. Okay, this on the banking business.
Right now, the Asian market.
Encircled by skyscrapers, I'm closing a business deal comfortably at the ease of technology, crossing horizons.
Okay, from our side also we need to.
Decades ago, no skyscrapers, no technology, but an enterprising communal spirit fed with resilience and determination. Market Street, the heart of the business district, was home to rows of shop houses featuring communal offices, affectionately known as Chettiars. Sitting on the floor by low desks, bending over and writing an open ledger with utmost concentration. Those were the Chettiars, and amongst them was my great-grandfather, Chokalingam Chettiar.
நேர்மை நெறி தவறாது அறம் பிழாது தொழில் செய்து பொருளீட்டுவோமாக. தென்னாட்டுடைய சிவனே போற்றி. ஐயப்பா, இன்னைக்கு தேதி 10 ஆயிடுச்சு. நாம பணம் வசூல் பண்ண வேண்டியவங்களோட விவரம் எல்லாம் இதுல இருக்கு. மொத்தம் 8 பேரு. அதுல 2 பேரு கிட்டங்கிக்கே நேர்ல வந்து பணத்தை கொடுத்துறேன்னு சொல்லியிருக்காங்க. மத்த 6 பேரையும் நேர்ல போய் பார்த்து பணத்தை வாங்கிட்டு வந்துரு. பொழுது சாயறதுக்குள்ள வந்துரு. சரியா?
சரியா பச்சி, போயிட்டு வரேன்.
போயிட்டு வா.
In a credit-scarce, fast-growing colony, the Chettiars, as private financiers, provided the much-needed capital to fuel the business ambitions of entrepreneurs of all races in Singapore. The Chettiars financed almost everything: rubber, tin, real estate, and retail. They provided working capital loans, safekeeping of valuables, and organized regional fund transfers. The Chettiars were keen in lending to entrepreneurs, only if there was a business interest. The British referred to them as private financiers. They provided loans to a wide range of people, from business tycoons, shopkeepers, civil servants, to local royalty. Unable to secure loans from the Chinese and European banks, Chettiars became the marketplace for prospective entrepreneurs. When substantially large loan amounts were required, many Chettiar businessmen would pool their resources and lend the money, thereby sharing the risk of the investment.
நம்ம ரப்பர் தான் வந்திருந்தாரு. அவரும் அவர் சித்தப்பா பெரிய பசங்கெல்லாம் பேராக்ல இரும்பு சுரங்கத்தை குத்தகைக்கு எடுக்க போறாங்களாம். நம்ம கிட்டங்கி அவங்களுக்கு பழக்கம்ங்கிறதுனால எங்கிட்ட வந்து பேசினாங்க. சரி, தொகை பெருசா இருக்கிறதுனால 2 நாள்ல சொல்றேன்னு சொல்லியிருக்கேன். சரி, தொகை பெருசு, வர லாபமும் பெருசு, அதனால ஆளுக்கு 10 போட்டோம்னா நல்லா இருக்கும்னு நான் நினைக்கிறேன். உங்க அபிப்பிராயம் என்ன?
நம்ம ரப்பர் தான் தானே, நல்லா செஞ்சிருவோம். அண்ணே, இதுல ஏதாவது வில்லங்க எதுவும் இருக்கானே?
வில்லங்க ஒன்றும் இருக்காது, நல்லா கொடுக்கலாம்.
வில்லங்க இல்லைன்னா தாராளமா நம்ம பண்ணலாமே.
அப்ப செஞ்சிருவோம், நல்லா செஞ்சிருவோம்.
Chettiars maintained their books in Tamil using a unique accounting system called Aindohe, more commonly known as capital, credit, debit, profit or loss. Living and working together, the Chettiars were able to preserve their communal distinctiveness. Each Kittangi functioned as a self-sufficient community with an in-house cook, a laundryman, and other menial workers. Once the day's work was done, the Chettiar businessmen spent their evenings in prayer and playing traditional games. From the early days, Chettiars, who were meticulous bookkeepers and thriving entrepreneurs, were regarded as the pioneer bankers of Singapore.
So the Chettiars, they had a very structured training system, was apprenticeship. So I think the video you saw it earlier, basically every 3 years they did each stage until they were confident enough to start their own business. Usually they will be given capital to go and start another one, another new branch somewhere there. And that's how they expanded to 400 locations. Okay. And all their records in the early days were kept in Tamil and using these ola leaves. You know, this is before pen and paper. So they will scratch on these palm leaves and use that. And later on, they use paper and pen. And then by law, they were required to move to English in the 1920s. Okay, so that's a ledger book. That's it. So now we can go to the next section. Okay, their place of business was known as a Kittangi. Okay. So this is how it looks like, open floor with all these, each desk is a business. Okay. This guy is a bigger business. So he's got 4, this is the boss, he's sitting outside and these are his 3 clerks. Okay. And behind they got cupboards. Okay. This is another example. The boss always sits outside. These are this is a big one with 4 shops and they got the big chest and then there's a safe. You can see this is a metal safe. Okay, this is an example of metal safe from the 1859. Okay, there's the furniture and you can go to the museum and see these. Okay, inside the Kittangi, there was the cook. And this all their bedding there. At night, what they used to do is roll out put the desk on top of the cupboard and roll out the mats. So in-house cook. Okay, they had some kind of a function or event at the celebration at the temple. So there were also children staying there because the boys, they were under apprenticeship. And this is on the third floor, they had a shrine. So they would go there, and this is doing the Pongal. Okay, so I will not go through in detail. They basically had a very disciplined lifestyle. 6 o'clock, they'll wake up, they will pray, and then have breakfast. They start their day, either writing their accounts or going out to meet their clients. And then they end the day by going to the temple. Okay, they had a very strict value system. This is how they could operate over 400 towns. You know, they needed a very strong software. So unity, simplicity, humility, honesty, and respect for elders. Because in the Kitangi, you're living there for, sometimes 30 years, you live there with, 3 years each time. If you're not united, you're all infighting, 20, 30 people there, you can't live. And so the law and order is kept by the elders. If the elders say something, everyone will fall in line. And then entrepreneurship, piety, and philanthropy. Okay, so a lot of these are the Protestant work ethic. Okay, this is a photo of my grand-uncle, so my grandfather's brother and my great-grandfather, Singapore. Okay, there's another Chettiar. Okay, there's this video we will not watch because hello.
Hi.
Okay, just a second. Do you want to watch this video? If I watch this video, we will run over time. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think never mind, because if we saw the posting, we can overrun the time. So could you restart again?
Okay.
Yeah. Hold on.
Okay, now I'll show you another video. This is a 5-minute video taken on the 50th anniversary of Singapore. This is for Singapore channel. And this, I have to go into my laptop.
Hi, I'm Abhi Shankara, and today we are going to discover a little more on one aspect of Singapore's history. And it's got to do a lot with this man over here. This is a Chettiar. He's dressed in his iconic garb and getting on with his business, which is giving out loan to a businessman. You see, long before there were banks, the Chettiars were Singapore's first financiers. But what brought the Chettiars to Singapore in the first place? And how did they end up being financiers? This guy has all the answers. Subbiah is a 4th-generation Chettiar, and he is showing me around what used to be Chettiar Central. So can you tell us more about Market Street? How was it like in the past?
Okay, Market Street, Malacca Street, and Julia Street, these were like a micro India. Market Street had a lot of Chettiars, and in fact, the local Indians used to call it Chetty Street.
Who did the Chettiars lend money to?
I would say the primary people who borrowed money were Chinese businessmen, those entrepreneurs who had talent but no capital. 2 people whom they dealt with is Tan Kah Kee, who was famous for all the rubber plantation. That was his main business, rubber plantations. And also Lok Wan Tho, who is he's known for the Cathay cinema.
To get a sense of this world that the Chettiar financiers lived in, I'm visiting Tangrove. The Chettiars built a temple here, and just around the area, they set up offices called Kittingis. And this is the only Kittingi still left in Singapore. Each Chettiar had his own shop. Nothing fancy, just a cabinet, a simple table, and their books. The Chettiars had been traders for centuries, and they accumulated wealth. So they also extended their businesses to give out loans. It was the British East India Company who invited the Chettiars to come to Penang, Malacca, and Singapore from the British-ruled India. Local businesses were built riding on a Chettiar's loan. This is Subbiah's dad, Lakshmanan. He's been a Chettiar since he was 19, learning the trade from his father, who came to Singapore in the 1900s. He says the Chettiars didn't just lend out money to businesses, they also gave out personal loans, and they were always very careful.
They really check their background. So when someone comes to them the first day, they will ask him, does your wife know that you're going to take a loan? So they will ask, where do you stay? And they will go and check the house and see whether it's legit. So Mrs. Subbiah, what is this actually?
Okay, these are traditional Tamil accounts. My great-grandfather, Mr. Subramaniam Chettiar, passed away in Singapore in 1987. So these are a list of his outstanding loans as well as bad debts. A few $100 loan was a large amount of money then, you know.
Indeed, hundreds and thousands of dollars were exchanged here. But the Kittangi wasn't just where the Chettiars worked.
So end of the day, they'll take these boxes and put them on top here. And then this mattress that you see, they are mats, they'll take it, roll it out here, and then they sleep. So it was a very simple bachelor lifestyle.
Mrs. Subbiah, you are a fourth generation Chettiar. So what do you think of your ancestors' contributions to Singapore?
The Chettiars were the first bankers in Singapore when no one had confidence in the economy of Singapore. Chettiars financed the port trade as well as development in Singapore. So from these early foundations, Singapore grew.
It's hard to imagine what Singapore would be like without the contributions of these men. They have contributed so much to early Singapore's economy and possibly shaped Singapore to what it is today. We owe these men a huge debt of gratitude. Yeah? Well, I'm Abhi Shankara, signing off. Back to you at the studio.
Okay, so now this Kittangi, okay, now this is a very, very key reason for their success. In fact, you can call it, you know, they made a huge amount of money in a short time. And, you know, from business theory, we know that you make money only when you have provided some kind of service, something you have offered something. That's why you make this kind of profit. And you must have taken big risks, if not risk return. So now, so what is it that enabled them to deliver this kind of value? Actually, it's the Kittangi. It's a major innovation when you think about it in today's, you know, MBA business terms. Okay, because all these commodity plantations, etc., were all over Malaya and Burma, rice fields in remote places with no road, no communications, and with uneducated people, you know, peasants, and they all needed money. So the bank model of being in a big city, Rangoon and Penang and Singapore, just cannot work. This is what you call micro lending. You need to go to where the client is. So the Kittangi was a major innovation because and the Chettiars were very few. Okay, so they had to keep a community. So the Kittangi enabled them to keep a community. They were able to get their own food. They built their own temple and other services as in India. The cost of living was very low because they were all sharing in a co-op. And because they were networked, they were all in the same Kittangi, they talk to each other, they can widen their business network. For collective safety, you know, when you live in a rural area with no police, government police, you got all this money, you need security. So, yeah, living together gave them security and safety. They were near their customers. That's very important. You know, rubber plantation, they can see what the plantation is going, what's going on, you know, what's the reputation of this man. And they were available 24/7. So it's a great, easy, great customer service. Okay. And at the same time, the woman lived in India and they looked after the family. And the women were living in joint families. That means 4 brothers together. So there too, the family was taken care of because one brother will usually be back home and the others are working here. So there's a male member, their cost of living at home is low and they have security. Okay. And so all these things also help them increase their investment capital to lend out more money. So when you think about it, it's really customer service at its best. 24/7 at your doorstep, and I know you personally, everything about you, and I can customize my loan to you. And it's also a kind of branch banking come self-sufficient community. Okay, without this Kittangi format, the Chettiars could not, even if they had the capital, they could not have succeeded because the lending requirements were not in the cities, but were in the most remotest places they actually started first. Okay, so that's it. Okay, now we move on to the next section, competitors and modern banking. So Chettiars, they had what was their competitive advantage? They were willing to deal with locals and speak local language, willing to go to remote areas. The process is very simple, not much forms, willing to lend small amounts as well as big, able to give loans without collateral, and the service was personal. I know you, you're not just a digit, okay? And they function as a community. This was very important. So people trust them. Oh, Chettiar, they have a community reputation. He won't cheat. And the bank said Chettiar is a good credit, so I'll give it to him. Okay. And they were patronized by the colonial authorities. You know, they had the blessings. They said, we protect you legally, we give you security, go lend the money. Okay. So, and they had access to European bank capital. Okay. So what they were doing, as I said, was a kind of microfinancing and branch banking. So this is an author, Virginia Thompson, who had had some, they could call them the worst of a bad profession, but here she has something, a different observation. They have the advantage of lending money with a minimum of formalities and guarantees. They have almost no running expenses, a great solidarity amongst them, and they apportion the interest to the material status of the debtor. This is in 1937 in Indochina, which is basically Vietnam. Okay, so what were the banks doing then? Okay, the thing is, we think of banks today as our deposit bank where we can go there, borrow money, deposit our money, but this is not how banks started off. Banks started off as what you call merchant banks. When the British Empire had trade all over the globe, they needed to make payments, for imports from Argentina, South Africa, and Singapore and Japan. So they need exchange banks to deal with the foreign currency and make all these big payments and receive money. That's what a merchant bank is, supporting the big hongs, or what you say in Chinese, hong, the trading houses. Okay. So when they came to Malaya also, they were only in the ports. Basically, they only be Singapore and Penang. If you go a bit deeper, you go to KL and Ipoh because there were a lot of tin millionaires. That's the max. No bank had more than 4. And they were not interested in lending to local businessmen, and they didn't understand the local businessmen. And it was not even that the charter, the bank manager can't even do that because it's not in his SOP to lend to the local. Okay, they are not SME banking. Okay, so this is why only to the Chettiars, more or less. If you're really established, a Tan Kaki or Yap Aloy, someone, then maybe you can go to the bank. Some established people could. Okay, so this is what you need to remember. It's not the bank of today. The consumer bank and SME bank were not there. So there was no real competition. And then slowly other people came in, foreign banks and then local banks, and then Chinese money lenders and Sikh money lenders. This is more from after World War I, when the families, Chinese women and families came. So there was need for consumer loan, okay, and pawn shop, which was a Techu business, okay? Now, so the colonial banks, the first ones all came from India, Union Bank in 1840, and then the famous banks now, Standard Chartered is 1859, 1877. Singapore is already a bustling port, 60 years in the making, okay? So you can see how late they are in the game, okay? Then the local banks, okay? The actual consumer lending and SME lending by banks actually starts with the Chinese banks. Okay, the first one is Kwong Yik Bank, 1903. This is where, Chinese made a lot of money from rubber. As I told you, there was widespread wealth. So now they had a lot of cash from rubber. They want to reinvest. And many of them were entrepreneurs doing different businesses. So they started their own banks. But all these were originally Klang banks. So this is for Cantonese. Si Hai Tong Bank was Techu. And then the 3 Hokkien banks, Chinese Commercial Bank, Ho Hong Bank, Overseas Chinese Bank. So they normally only lend to their clan members and usually only the established people. If you are a newcomer from China, Sing K, you just work as a coolie, now you want to start your small grocery shop, chances are low that you will get a loan from, even the Chinese bank before the war. Then what are today's modern Chinese banks? The OCBC, 1932. Okay, the earlier three banks I showed you, they merged, the Hokkien banks. Then UOB started in 1935, was also Hokkien, and OUB is 1947. Okay, then after independence, the government, commission started either as a direct owner or indirect owner, three banks, DBS, solely for SME banking and to support all government enterprise, Tatley Bank and Keppel Bank. And then you also had the Malayan banks like Maybank and Hong Leong Bank and Rashid Hussain Bank. They also started branches. So after 1965, a lot of alternatives to borrow money, okay, for people. And that's also the slow demise of the Chettiars, because they not only lost a lot of money during World War II, but there was a lot of competition and they were becoming more and more irrelevant. Okay, so now it's my family. Now, I wanted to give you the big story of the Chettiars because it's about the community and not so much the family and their role in the development of Singapore and how they did their business. Now I'll give you the micro one on my story, lots of pictures. Okay. The first one to come here were two brothers, RMV Subramani Chetty and his brother Lakshmanan, who's older, who came 2 years earlier, but we don't have a photo of him, and he's my uncle, great grand uncle. So I put this is my lineage uncle. So we have his passport, so we know that. He lived in he was born on 5th of February 1877 and died in 1927. He started with his brother, and the firm's starting date is the account book start in 1892. So given the apprenticeship model and all that, they probably came in 87, 88 at around 10 or 11 and then started their own business. He died in Singapore. He had 2 daughters and he had 4 sons. One of the sons settled in India. The other 3 were in Singapore. And my grandfather is Nachiapan, 1913. Okay. And like other Chettiars, he owned a lot of properties. Okay. So this is during World War II. Well, they were in India. They all went back to India, leaving only one brother here. And they wanted to build a house, so they wanted to buy cement. So the cement was under rationing in India at that time because of the war. So the British requested for their income tax. And it's interesting that they filed their income tax in India based on their global properties in all British territories. So this is an extract from there of what they own, 1945. So in Malaya, which is basically Singapore for them, houses, rubber estate, 49 acres. And the rubber estate was on Coronation, was on 6th Avenue. I've been there in 1971. Okay, 49 acres. You know what you call Lantana Avenue? Yeah, that was where opposite anyway, opposite, I forgot the road, the Malay road. Okay. Then outstandings as debts and vacant plots in the town worth 13 acres. In Ceylon, they had a partnership firm. And in Burma, they had 46 acres of paddy. And this is a very small firm. My grandfather was no big money lender in Singapore. Okay. He's more towards not the smallest, but kind of medium to lower end. And this would be a typical balance sheet. Most of them had, 10 shop houses, something like that. So now the detail of the properties in Singapore, you can see here. Can you see? Yeah, it's a Pitane Road, number 17. The other one I can't read is number 76, some road. Kings Road, 85. Upper Serangoon Road, 999. Geylang Lorong 29, number 27A, and Rangoon Road. So this was all the valuation of those properties, and there was some other vacant land. Okay, so this is his kind of his asset profile. That's him. Now that's him on his passport. Okay, the passports were only introduced after World War I, so he has to get a passport. And you can see even his passport photo, no shirt. Okay, his arrival date in Penang, 18 December 1920. And who came along? His eldest son, 10 years old, male, Velayapan, which is what fits the story, right? They brought them for apprenticeship. Okay. And he's described as an agent here. To Singapore as an agent for his firm, because. Okay, and this is a photo taken in Singapore, the three brothers. That's my grandfather and that's my father. This is around 1950s. And this is my uncle, who's his son. He's a pediatrician in Singapore. Some of you may know Dr. Velayapan. Now that's my grandfather in Singapore. Okay, he loved his Rolei camera. This is before the Rolei factory here. His hobby was taking pictures. Thanks to him, I have a lot of photographs. And most of those with the National Archives on the Chettiars are thanks to his photographs, okay? That's him again in the Market Street, Kitangi with my brother. That's his car at the temple. That's him in 1938. He was a treasurer of the Chettiar temple, the Tank Road temple. So that's him in this, the old temple front. That's my father. This is actually in the Kitangi, the actual shops. That was my father, and those are two other firms. That's in Raffles Place with a group of other Chettiars with my father. And that's my family. That's me here, my brother, my sister in 1977. That's my family. Okay, my son and daughter. This is long ago, like 20 years ago. I don't look so handsome anymore. Okay, so now what's their legacy in Singapore? Okay, out of those Chettiar families, money lending families, most of them went back to India. As I told you, after Market Street was closed down in 77, everyone, and then they were afraid of what happened in Vietnam and all that is going to happen in Singapore. So they all went back to India. They didn't bring their sons. And so there may be only about 10 families, maximum 20, with any links to the money lending days. And only 2 of them are still doing money lending. Now it's under like the, the new money lending, under the new format. And they're active in the Money Lenders Association. The rest, like myself and all that, we went into education. My father never asked me to do the business. I never learned the business. And I am a finance controller. And many of them, I think the numeracy and all that, they naturally go into accounting, finance, auditing, even IT are very common professions. Now, what is their legacy in Singapore? We know for sure that the first Chettiars arrived in 1824. Before that, we don't know. They were already in Penang when Raffles went to ask the business people to come in 1819. So we know Narayana Pillai came. Whether Chettiars came, we're not sure. But 1824, there are documents to show that. Okay, Singapore through all its investment cycle, opium, tin was Malaya and Singapore, and then rubber. Through all the cycles they did. Okay, and there's an interesting story about Raffles Annapurna. Maybe I'll say it at the end. Okay, now, so they had so they basically finance all the business development. Okay, now I told you about the opium. Okay, and now I'll just go into dive deep a little bit. This is a quotation that comes from this book, Realms of Silver by Dr. Sir Compton Mackenzie. This to celebrate the 100 years of banking in the East of Standard Chartered Bank. This is their official publication. So on the Singapore chapter, they say, the Singapore Chettiars maintain the reputation worn by Chettiars elsewhere of being businessmen of shrewdness and integrity. Most of the opium trade, passed through their hands, and they were careful to deal with only Chinese merchants who were financially sound. It was a very rare occurrence for a Chettiar not to meet his obligation. And in the next page, it says, by 1880, the bulk of the local discounts were still Chinese promissory notes, which means they are saying IOU, endorsed over to the Chettiars, representing money borrowed from the latter. That means borrowed from the Chettiars for trade purposes. So they borrow from the Chettiars to pay for the opium to the British ships which come from India. And then the Chettiar keeps this 3 months later or whatever date when this Chinese businessman sells the opium in Hong Kong, he will get paid. It just shows the thing. That's how it works. Okay. So that's how much they were in the opium trade. Okay, then their base was in Market Street. They had 6 shop houses and about 200 firms at the peak. Singapore was the largest center in Malaya. There were also some smaller ones elsewhere. In fact, there were so many kitangis, and the toilets, you know, those days are the bucket toilet, that because traffic jam, they actually constructed their own toilet on Phillip Street next door, so that morning people can go there and bathe and shower. Okay, and in World War II, one of the shop houses was bombed. Okay, and this area is also the first Little India of Singapore. It was the merchants area. Okay, Tanjong Pagar was the working class area. So a lot of businesses like Mustafa and Juma Boys, they all started from Market Street. And when Market Street was being redeveloped, okay, this is the Market Street. This was my Kitangi, my house. Okay, these are 2 photos. You can see the current UOB Bank building before the black cladding that's there. Today, this is the one Raffles Place. This is where the thing was. Okay, and this building is where the Kitangi was. Now, when was 1977, when it was redeveloped, actually Lee Kuan Yew asked SR Nathan to talk to the community. He told them, look, you all own so many of the properties there, and you have the cash. Why don't you redevelop it into big skyscrapers like this? And the Chettiars, you know, they were all backward looking because of Vietnam and all that. They said, you know, we're going to lose everything. And Lee Kuan Yew at that time was considered to be a communist, you know. He's a socialist, so he'll take over. You're taking over land all over left and right. Many Chettiars lands were actually had been taken over. So they had no confidence. They said, no, don't want, we want to go back. And then they actually said with Bank of Singapore, who was opposite side of the road, why don't you kongsi with them? They develop, they take half the stories, and you take half the stories. But Chettiars were adamant, and there were too many heirs to, you know, do a deal. So they, you know, they gave up the opportunity, and each of them got $7,000 compensation. For my grandfather, I have the check. Okay, so today there's the most expensive traded property in Singapore. The last traded is about, I think, 15,000-20,000 per square foot. Okay, so given by, I think that the shop, that whole shop house went for 200,000 then. Okay, today I think it will be easily 30-40 million. Yeah. So that's my father in the Kitangi. That's me the last day when we are moving out of the piti. That's me taking it out. Okay, there's now only one new Kitangi, which was built in the same way next to the temple, One Tank Road. As you can see, it's teeming with business. You know, we have people even sleeping during the daytime. That's how much business is going on there. So it's more of a hereditary heritage place. Only one person is actually doing anything. Some Chettiars did some other businesses, usually in partnership with their clients. A lot of them had rubber and oil palm plantations, and they owned properties, shop houses, bungalow houses, atap houses, vacant land. Okay, as I said, not unusual to own 5 to 10 per company. They built a school, English school, where today's McDonald House at Dhoby Ghaut is. So for 4 years, it was running at from 1937-38, but after the war, it was never reopened. Then they started a Tamil school before this. Okay, in India, the Ramakrishna Mission started a Tamil school, and from there was a major push to have schools. And they started a Dandayadabani school around River Valley, but it closed down for I think various reasons. Then they went to the English school. Okay, this is the Chettiar's premier institution. There's a photo at Dhoby Ghaut. They were big contributors to the Indian National Army, which Indians would know of. There was a big independence movement here. And then they also were major contributors to the development of Tamil. Because after the war, educated Chettiars came to Singapore. Many of them had degrees from what's Chettiar University called Annamalai University. So they were pioneer teachers. They set the Singapore syllabus, teachers training college. They were in the media, etc. Okay, this is at the museum. You can see a slip of donation by one firm to the INA. Okay, $25,000 in 1943. Okay, if you took it at not 100x, let's say 50x, that's $1.3 million. Just one donation to the Indian National Army. Okay, it's at the Indian Heritage Center. Okay, they also built two temples, the Dandayadabani temple and the Ganesh temple, and they were so this is the new Tank Road temple, and there's the old one, the original one. That's the only one. That's the one in Chinatown. It's the Ganesh temple, elephant god. Okay, this is the ad from Thaipusam ad in the English newspaper 1904, inviting the public. Those are Chettiar boys. Okay, so now just a few more things to share and before the ending of the presentation. This is a letter that the colonial government wrote to the king for the King George coronation fireworks letter in 1937. Okay, so so here they are requesting the Chettiar community to sponsor the fireworks for the coronation. Okay, normally they will go ask each community to do something. This is a way to show the loyalty as well as lower the cost of their government. Okay, so now I just take an extract from that letter. Okay, this is 19 February 1937. Okay, this is the text. In fact, it has almost become a custom to appeal to the Chettiars for their cooperation on all important celebrations, as the community is one of the richest, if not the richest, of the several communities in the colony. Okay, so so that shows the prestige in which the British held them. Now, there are several street names which have Chettiars, Mayapa Chettiar and Potong Pasir. 3 roads in the River Valley Road area, Arunachalam, Muthuraman and Narayanan Chetty. In Bukit Timah 6th Avenue, there's Annamalai Avenue. And there were 3 who are not in the, already extinguished. And this Mayapa Chettiar, he owned the brickworks there, which supplied, the sand quarry to supply brickworks. That's why the area is called Potong Pasir. In Malay, it means digging for sand. And it is said that during his time is in the before 1900, when British ships carrying treasury, treasury ships coming from England to Singapore to pay the British payroll and finance the government, they used to be delayed, because of the climate or whatever, they are sail ships. So whenever that happened, the governor will ask his staff to go to Mayapa Chettiar and borrow money from him to pay the payroll first. And then when the ship arrives, repay him. Okay. Those are the road names. Okay. 2 people in personalities in politics. MP Ramasamy, he was Lee Kuan Yew's first chief clerk. He joined him in a law firm. Okay. Just as he was entering politics. And then later he became his personal private secretary and served him in that capacity or similar capacity from 1954 to 1971. He's probably the longest serving personal assistant to Mr. Lee. Okay. And he also stood for 3 elections under the PAP. Okay. Okay, Shanmugam, the law minister right now, he's also a Chettiar. And this is Ramasamy in the Chettiar temple with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And just one anecdote is that Mr. Lee's how Ramasamy joined Lee Kuan Yew was that this says something about Lee's prescience even then. He was his father was borrowing money from Ramasamy's father after the war. Okay, a lot of people had cash problems after the war, partly because Japanese currency and so on. His father was borrowing, and so when Lee Kuan Yew started his law firm, he said, I'm a small lawyer, I can't get all the big British business. I must go for local business. So the best one is what? It's all these Chettiars who are coming back after the war, 1950s, early 1950s, and putting bankruptcy notice on people. So he said, okay, I'll go. I need this business. And he's just around the Market Street. His office is Malacca Street, just around the corner. So he says, what's the best way for me to get the business? If I get a Chettiar staff itself. So he goes to, he asks his father, go and ask around whether there's any English educated Chettiar, because Chettiars didn't go into education then. It so happens that the person who was borrowing money from his son had come to Singapore to take over the father's business, but he didn't like money lending, and he was English educated. He did O levels. So he said, "Oh, you want to work for this guy or not?" Then he said, "Okay, I work for him." So that's how he started to work for Lee Kuan Yew. So you can see even then, how he picks people. So even my father, grandfather, we have documents from Lee and Lee using their company because Chettiar's preferred lawyer was Lee and Lee. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And now there's also other legacy in Singapore. You saw the Chettiar statue in the video. They're covered in the National History Museum, the Indian Heritage Center, and also in school textbooks. Okay. In the 1970s, there were about 50 families. Families means mostly not money lending anymore. They were working. Now there are about 1,000 people. They all came after the IT boom, engineers and IT. Okay. Some pictures of that. Okay, that's in the National Museum. That's in the Indian Heritage Center and Asian Civilization Museum. That's in the Singapore textbook. Okay, so yeah, I won't have time to cover the rest because that's about India and Southeast Asia. So thank you very much. And I apologize if I have gone above the time limit a little bit. Please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, I told you that, I told you that I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. Goes back to 1819 in Stamford Raffles. I'll end off with that. Now, the Chettiars were actually traders. They were not money lenders. And they were present in this area before the British. Okay, so one anecdote that bears that out, which is thanks to the research of Amajit Singh, is that there was a Chettiar trader who owned this ship called the Annapurna, trading ship. And this ship was trading with Penang, okay? And at one point, it was taken over by the pirates, captured by the pirates who were under the control of the Sultan of Aceh. So he was trying to get it back, but he couldn't negotiate. He went to the Penang resident consul, he can't get it back. So he said, I have to go higher authority. So he went to Calcutta, which was, Penang was under Calcutta then. So he went to the governor there of India, and he told him Hastings, and he told him, look, I need this ship to be released. Can you help me? So Hastings says, yes, you are a big, respectable man, a big ship, I'll help you. So he said, who is the best person placed for this? It was Stamford Raffles, because he was the person in charge of Bencoolen for many years. And it so happened that at that time, Raffles had come to Calcutta to make the proposal to Hastings to say, look, we should start a new colony somewhere around where Singapore is. So give me the finance and resources. I'll go to Penang and do an expedition. So Hastings said, wow, what a good coincidence. On the way, you will be passing Aceh. So why don't you do Mr. Chettiar a favor and go to see the Sultan and try to get the ship released. So Raffles actually goes to Aceh first before coming to Penang and tries to negotiate the release. But the story is that he didn't manage to get the ship released. And then he comes to Penang, and then he joins up with Farquhar, and they sail to Singapore to sign the agreement with the Sultan of Hussein. Okay, so the links of the Chettiars to Singapore go back right to the very, very beginning. And let me end off with that, and thank you for your attention.